Thank you. As Geordie says, my name's Ian Wagdin. I work with BBC Research and Development, and I'm also the chair of the Content Production Technology Working Group within 5G Mag. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it, and the work we've done so far, and hopefully a little bit on the work that we've got coming up. So, firstly, if I can move my slide on, let's try that. There we go. There's three big elements that we're looking at really around 5G for media. There's the production workflows, which is kind of what we do on location, the sort of cameras, the actual nuts and bolts of the audio kit and all that kind of stuff. Then we've got contribution, which I've kind of broadly categorized as kind of moving it around, so getting it from location back to the broadcast center or online somehow. And then finally we've got distribution, which is kind of getting it out to our audiences. And we've been looking at all of those areas of where 5G can impact on that. But for this particular piece of work, we're really focusing on the top two, production and contribution, and distribution has been handled elsewhere, both within 5G Mag as well as 3GPP and other areas. So why are we doing it? Well, we've been using wireless for quite some time. This won't come as a surprise to many of you on the call, but we've been doing wireless production getting on for 40, 50 years. And here we can see some analog kit. We had 4 channels on this particular kit in a 7 gig range, and we used to have to deal with kind of point-to-point microwave links. And some of this technology is still in use. Microwave technology is still quite prevalent in some parts of the world. But it's now gone digital. So we've basically, and what the digital world enabled us to do is to kind of take the bandwidth we have, apply compression, put more signals down it, handle data in a more efficient way, and effectively enabled make sure that we're seeing the full kind of digital landscape. Can I just check you're seeing my screen correctly there?
It's all fine. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I just saw your message. I wasn't sure if you were seeing the previous screen or the main screen. So thanks for that. And then finally, where we are now, we're moving to IP. And some of that is, we could look at it and just say, actually, we just need to do the digital stuff over the IP landscape. But we're seeing these new protocols coming in. We're seeing things like NDI, 2110. We're seeing more cloud-based workflows, more remote working. And as we move to IP, we start to think about, actually, well, what are the opportunities here to revolutionize some of the wireless technology that we've got, and not just use the same techniques that we used in the digital world? What are the advantages that we can do in an IP world? And so that's a revolution that's going on within the industry anyway. And so kind of marrying that alongside the telecoms industry, which is also going through a similar revolution. You know, they started with analog, they've gone through digital, and they're now very much in an IP world, and that's what's reflected through the through the mobile phone industry. And if you really think about our engagement so far in 4G, well, it was about mobile data, and we've done some work with that, and we've used bonded cellular solutions, and they've been quite effective for contribution. But we've got this opportunity now to sort of input into the 5G and beyond standards that mean that we can kind of inform them about what our requirements are and therefore get a better solution, and B, also learn about what other verticals are doing. Because as we move into these more IP-based spaces, the media industry is perhaps a smaller player than it has been when we owned a lot of the technology and we designed a lot of the technology. So we need to be more wary of what's going on in the wide world. And that applies to spectrum. And Qualcomm produced this quite handy slide which kind of indicates where spectrum sits across the globe. And unfortunately, it isn't going to be one size fits all. And it's just worth calling this out because we see perhaps a lot of millimeter wave activity in the 5G space in the US. In Europe, we're seeing slightly less of that. And certainly for things like audio, where we're using kind of sub 700 megahertz channels currently, some of that is earmarked for 5G. And this is going to continue to grow. So we need to be mindful of where we actually use our existing radio technologies for radio mics, radio cameras, contribution links, all of these things that actually moving to 5G may give us a sort of slightly better or a more, better use of some of the spectrum. Now, we're really efficient in the way we currently use spectrum, and so therefore there is a little bit of a sort of conflict here about what we want to do. But I think one of the important things is that, particularly if we look in Europe, we see a lot of the spectrum we use is pretty close in some of the bands to the new Radio 3 GPP bands, and there's some overlap as well. So we're starting to explore about actually where can we kind of reapply some of these learnings and techniques that we have expertise in, and perhaps think about how we do things differently within our own spectrum. So where are we going to use it? We've got effectively a few different types of productions where we think there may be some applications. Most of them around live. I'm concentrating on live because it's not to say we won't use them on pre-recorded programs and things like that, but actually a lot of that will just deliver because the bandwidth will be better and the internet will just be better. So things like file transfers and things like that are probably just going to happen, and they won't take too much intervention. Is ultimately it's what the networks are designed to do. But where we've got these kind of big types of production, these tier one types of production, as I've talked about them, these are typically, they're very well planned. They've got significant resources attached to them. Quite often there's statutory obligation around them. So things like national events, or you've got sort of legal obligations to cover under the terms of the broadcasting license. Quite often there's contractual obligations. So if you're a rights holding broadcaster, then the rights of the event company, whether that's the World Cup or the Olympics or the Premier League, they have certain obligations placed upon you as to the quality of the type of coverage that you have to give. These types of workflows are often, they have multiple stakeholders. So quite often there's not just one company covering them, there are several. Quite often there's international interests, so the likes of the Eurovision Song Contest and the Olympics and things like that. There's also studio shows fall into this. And typically here we see audio as a separate workflow. So obviously it is, it's part of the workflow, but you have specialist expertise. So for instance, on the Eurovision Song Contest, you'll have a dedicated audio team who are doing the audio, similar on the proms, royal events and stuff like that. So the audio is treated almost as a separate workflow that's then combined as you pull it through. Then we've got tier 2 events, and these are actually some of the most interesting because they tend to be, they still tend to be planned, perhaps tend to be a little bit more in-house. So they're kind of smaller scale. They don't have the kind of big worldwide interest. They're a slightly simpler setup. Sometimes they're hard to cover or justify against the size of the audience. So increasingly we're being asked to kind of cover more events, get to things like classical music concerts or comedy festivals or political debate or minority sports, where perhaps the audiences aren't the same as you would get for a World Cup football match, and therefore you don't want to deploy your expensive resources. So you need to kind of think about different ways of doing it. And they're also quite a strong candidate for remote production. And then audio potentially could be combined with the video here. So for a comedy show or a classical music conference or something like that, or a political debate, you might take the desk feed out of what's happening at the local event and then combine that with your video rather than put separate audio in there. And then finally, types of production here, tier 3. This is really kind of news and current affairs, the stuff that's unplanned. Quite often it's an in-house resort. It's probably scalable from mobile journalism up to full crews. Quite often it will start with mobile journalism and then just grow and grow and grow. Quite often it's in difficult locations or locations where we don't have the resources that we'd like to have on board. Quite often there are multiple outlets covering the same types of event as well. So you need to think about actually access to spectrum and things like that. So those are a lot of the things that we're thinking about in types of event. And then beyond that, we've also got the audio workflows that we're going to discuss a little bit later on. So taking some of that, about 2 years ago, some of us on the call were involved in working with SA1. where Frederick explained earlier, where we sort of set the high level requirements. We looked at some of these areas of the types of things that we want to do, and we particularly looked at 9 or 10 different user cases that range from live audio production through different types of video production, through to live events using airborne relays, sort of Tour de France marathons, that type of stuff, immersive media type stuff, and then some onboarding things. And some of those things are slightly more important than others. So I would say that currently the bit where we've got the focus and the priority on are some of those user cases around audio production. You'll possibly hear a little bit later on about a large project called 5G Records. A big section of that is specifically on audio production, and Lola, my colleague from Sennheiser, will speak a little bit more about the detail on that later on. We're then also thinking about, okay, well, what does probably more the compressed and the remote production and the types of cameras where we're using COF-DM type radio cameras now. So those are, again, a little bit of a priority for us. That's not to say the other things aren't important. It's just that we've got to kind of break the work down into chunks to work out where we're going to focus our attention. And then finally, one big set of requirements that we identified was around actually non-public networks, and media applications, particularly production applications, could be a large user of the non-public network technologies. So that's why we're here today, to really think about how we might use those non-public networks and what could be the advantages of those and what we want to do with them. I'm going to hand over to Lola just to quickly talk through some of the audio workflows that we've been exploring. Lola.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yes, well, regarding audio in AB Prod, we presented or provided 4 different use cases. The first two on the, let's say, the top part of the slide, which are the live audio presentation and the audio streaming live performances, are use cases that focus on live audio. On the one side, that kind of audio production that requires the closed loop from the artist on the stage, from the microphone to the in-ear monitor. And this one, it's posing really the most strict requirements on latency and on synchronization of the devices. The one on the presentation can be seen as something that is kind of a relaxed version of this live on a stage use case. And the other 2 use cases were, for instance, the intercom one, and the other was for introducing the aspects of the audio production that are not really related to the content, to the production of the audio content, but like the other audio links and the audio use cases that are supporting audio production. That's the case of the intercom, and put the focus on, for instance, the low latency and the need for group communication, that is for multicast. Can you go ahead, the next one?
Yeah, I'll come back to you. I was just going to go through the bit that I missed out on, sorry, was this was part of a study item for AV Prod called 22.827, which was the study item, and from that we then generated some requirements that went into a document called VIAPA, or Video and Imaging Applications for Professional, video imaging and audio for professional applications, and those are all kind of listed in the document 22.263, and effectively what you do is you start with a whole bunch of requirements and the user cases, and that's what we've kind of explained there, and then you generate these high level requirements, and then we'll take those to SA2 and SA4, and that's kind of where we are. The service requirements that we identified in a lot of this work were key. I mean, these were 5 that I pulled out, 5 or 6 that I pulled out, which were kind of really key. So the first one was kind of non-public network requirements. So this is what we're here to talk about today, but also some of these requirements we put in the kind of generic specification for 5G, even though they're very specific to media, they were considered general enough to go into the wider requirements. Then we talked about support for open broadcast standards, because it's important for us to be able to have these technologies that work alongside our wired technologies. Clock synchronization is one that continues to cause much debate, and the kind of granularity of that, but it is quite an important one, particularly when you're in kind of multi-camera scenarios, or even in IP scenarios where you're not quite sure of the network stability, how you want to handle that clock synchronization. Network exposure is just simply a way of kind of identifying and onboarding your equipment, and similarly kind of service continuity, how reliable the networks are, and how you deliver those services. And obviously we want quite robust services around those. So we did a lot of work on that, worked with a number of people who are on this call, and identified a whole bunch of sort of performance requirements for different types of production requirements, and a lot of these are, I'm not going to go through them, but they're all in the Viper specs, and some of them we're reviewing as we kind of work through and we understand the technologies or things change. So as new codecs come on board or different ways of doing things come on board, we'll review these and keep them up to date. And some of them are, as we learn to work with remote production, we're starting to kind of understand that perhaps the latency figures need to be higher or lower and all that kind of stuff. And that's why we're continuing to do this work with SA4 in order to kind of define and kind of refine some of these things as we kind of move through. And again, similarly with the audio, Lola, do you want to just talk through your requirements for audio?
Thank you, Ian. Yes, well, basically you said the most important things that I wanted to share with this slide. Maybe just to tell that, well, we focus very much in the VIAPA and the AB Broad work on the live audio performances, and tables are, the performance requirements tables are very much oriented on that use case. And I will say that the work that we are doing in SA4 give us the opportunity to look broader into the audio production use cases and workflows, and let's say move a little bit away for this from these key very strict KPIs that we put into this study. Although I will say that the key topics that we are still looking at are the same that we define in VIAPA, and those are, I mean, the same that you said exactly. And deployment options, well, in the VIAPA work, we very much concentrated, well, you told that on the non-public networks, and there is a lot of work around the wish to work with standalone non-public networks due to this, well, the possibility of isolation, full customization of the quality of service, and for particularly the possibility also the work in a kind of ad hoc and temporary modus. We are still looking into non-public networks and opening the scope in SA4 for possible other deployment options.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
So yeah, just generally, just to kind of recap the key themes that we've been looking at, these elements of high bandwidth support, support for open networks, quality of service, or kind of low packet rate, and all of these things that you would expect us to be looking at. But it's really important that we continue to look, because even when we do our kind of first initial test, then quite often we're seeing some things that are not right, some things which are better than expected, some things that are not performing as expected. But as the network evolves, we hope to be able to improve things and configure things and run different ways. And finally, I don't think it'll be one size fits all either. We'll see these different types of networks that come in, everything from the kind of public network, the public LAN mobile network, as it's termed, through things like slicing and traffic prioritization, public network initiated non-public networks, right through to standalone non-public networks. And these things will be sort of give you either more control, less control, or require more planning or less planning, and kind of give you more local coverage than wider coverage. And these are sort of some of the things that we're really trying to explore about actually the public network, well, we know the telcos will deliver around that, but actually what can we do around these kind of PNI and SA NPNs that are going to be beneficial for media. With that, I'm gonna pause there and let others speak to you in a lot more detail about these different types of networks. So thank you for that.